Hello, and welcome to this episode of EST, the podcast for established church leaders by established church leaders. My name is Josh.
My name is Sam, and it is a glorious day, Josh.
Yeah, is it good there?
It is. And the reason that it's glorious is not because of the weather. It's because we have Jenny Smith on the show today. Welcome to the show, Jenny.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
So Jenny's been on the show before. Some of our listeners may remember. Some of our listeners are new. They may not remember, but she's the lead curriculum developer at Awana. Bright Curriculum is the website, BRITE curriculum.com. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But we're going to be talking about the future of KidMin for small and mid-size churches. I think this is pertinent to just about all of our listeners. So I'm glad Jenny's on the show. But before we jump into the content, you guys know the drill. We have a great sponsor, Church Teams. Very grateful for Church Teams and all that they do for churches, particularly in the world of church management software. Did you know that 90% of text messages are read within 3 minutes? So if that's the case, it's a great way to communicate with your church. Church Teams gives you that ability to get your message heard and to hear back from your people. They've got a great messaging system, text messaging system. They can help you get all that set up. They do a lot of other things too. They've got giving modules and check-in and, attendance tracking, connection cards, all the stuff for church management software. But, you should definitely check out their text messaging system. They've got great prices for churches of all sizes. Their prices are actually based on, the people in your church. So no matter what size church you are, their systems are scalable to you. And they can grow with you as you grow as a church, or if you're a larger church, they can certainly help you too. So we're grateful for Church Teams. You can check them out at churchteams.com. All right, Jenny, we are glad to have you, and we're going to be talking about this KidMin in small and mid-sized churches. And let's just go ahead and kind of get it out of the way what we mean by small and mid-sized. The median church size is 65 people. A lot of churches that have children's ministries, that's kind of where they begin, is that church of 50, 60 people. You've got 3, 4, 5 kids, and all of a sudden, we got to do something with these kids. And then upwards of 200, 250, 300, that's when you really start doing programs. So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing when it comes to children's ministry in these size churches, because you work for Awana, you help develop the Bright curriculum. This is what you do. So you're at ground level with all of this. Kind of just give us a quick cursory look of what's happening in these churches.
Yeah, for sure. And again, thanks so much for having me, guys. And yes, I work with Awana. Before that, I served 20 years in those kind of churches, right? In 2 different churches over 20 years, but lots of years on the ground level with churches and kids ministry leaders as well. I would say since COVID, a whole lot has changed, right? So a lot of the things that we'll be talking about today are trends that are really just over the past 3 or 4 years, because as COVID was for all of us in so many areas, a game changer, I think for kids ministry, it really was too. Some of these things that we'll talk about today are obvious results of COVID. Some maybe not so much, but I definitely see a lot of changes. I'd say the first thing that, and I know I come from a curriculum perspective, so I may seem a little biased, but I'm definitely seeing a lot of people question more the content of the curriculum that they're using and the approach that they're using. So for many years, I'd say for the past generation, we've been very focused on attraction and on making sure everything's fun and making sure everything's themed in a way that kids will relate to, which is all good and fine. But I see a lot more questions coming these days from kids pastors of, wait, I don't know that my curriculum's going as deep biblically as we want it to be. I don't know it's as focused theologically as I want it to be, which I think is a healthy question and a healthy place for our kids ministry space to be.
Yeah, I certainly see that a lot at Church Answers from what from the networking that we have there. The whole fun first, development second, or fun first, equipping second model is dying. And what people are hungry for is, hey, of course we want to have fun, but it's an equipping first, discipleship first model, fun second, which I think is a better model for the church. Josh, what are you doing? You're going to a new church, which we're going to be talking about that on the next episode, so you tune in there. But are you going to have to change everything at Louisville?
I don't know. I've purposely gone in with a little bit more ignorance this time. I am curious about this because what it makes me think of is I did student ministry for so long, and one of the complaints or one of the things that we were becoming aware of was if you have a student for 6 years and it's highly attractional, highly game centered, very cutting edge with the music, that sort of stuff, and then they graduate and you dump them into something that is way outdated and old and just a totally different philosophy, it makes a lot of sense that they're going to disengage. There were two church philosophies going on at that time. And so as student ministers, we were trying to shift more to a developmental approach away from an attractional approach. But what we're seeing though is with children's ministry being high-end snack time videos, and then you're doing the same transition. They get to student ministry and they don't like that anymore. They don't want to do that. And the student ministry is a different philosophy. And so I wonder, and I don't know if you have some thoughts on this, Jenny, but along with the idea of children's pastors and ministers asking you about the depth and the development of the student or the child, is there any sort of thought or questions being asked towards a holistic plan from birth until adulthood? And how is that shifting, if at all?
We have heard a lot of people asking. So we primarily right now write elementary curriculum. We're adding preschool because of the demand, because every conversation we had, people were like, well, why don't we have preschool? Now that we're adding preschool, our next question that we're getting just about as frequently is, what about students? So nobody's asked about grown-ups yet. Usually people who are working with age groups aren't worried about grown-ups. They can fend for themselves. But yeah, am getting that a lot more. And in fact, the reason that we didn't start with preschool is our consultant advised Awana, that was before my time, was elementary people are just thinking about elementary people. Preschool people are just thinking about preschool people, which I think may have been the case 10 years ago, but that's not the case anymore. People are looking at it holistically. They want their 3-year-olds learning the same thing as their 5th graders so that families can talk about it at home. And I see a lot of value in thinking that through. I usually advise churches, think through your whole plan. Like whether it's using the same curriculum or not, you need to have the same pathway speak the same language for kids, for students, all the way up into those young adult years. Exactly because of what you're saying, Josh, because Sam talks a lot about those transition points in between ministries. And when those transition points are rough, that's when we lose kids. But as smooth as it can be, if we're all the same family, we're all speaking the same language, then that helps smooth that out.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that really pains me. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but that move from preschool to children's to middle school to high school is I don't think people quite realize. But now that I'm a parent, I realize it. Now that I'm raising children in all those age categories, it's easy to see how that transition is the prompt for a family leaving the church. Because they are legitimately concerned about the development of their child. And if all of those ministries are not aligned, it doesn't necessarily mean they're all using the same curriculum, but if they're not aligned in philosophy, volunteers, approach, then what you may like in children's ministry, you may not like in middle school ministry, and you may not like in high school ministry. Jenny, what do we do with volunteers? I know that we're kind of reaching a stress point for a lot of our volunteers in churches. What is your analysis of these small and mid-sized churches when it comes to how we're training volunteers and how they can be really stressed out?
I don't mean to sound over dramatic about it, but I would say we're nearing a volunteer crisis in a lot of our churches. So children's ministry volunteer, that's an area that has not recovered since the pandemic. So I remember saying to you, Sam, when we started back, after everything was shut down, people are ready to send their kids back. For some reason, they thought it was safe to send their kids back, but not safe to come volunteer, right? Like it took us a
Mm,
long time to get people to come back to volunteer in the ministry space. And it's just never recovered. I don't know if it was having months off, if it was, discovering what it was like to go to church on Sunday or just go to the park on Sunday and not have that commitment. I'm not sure the root of it, but I hear it across the board. There's not a
mm,
church I've spoken to that is not struggling with filling in and getting those volunteers. So I think churches across the board are going to have to reevaluate how we're doing that, how we're staffing with volunteers. And I don't know that the answer. I think the easy answer is, well, let's restructure our programming so we don't need as many volunteers, or let's restructure our programming so you only serve a couple times a year. I think that that's pragmatically maybe the best an option. It's pragmatically an option, but I don't think it's best for the discipleship of kids. I think it's still best to have as often as possible the same adults with the same kids. So we've got to figure, I think it's a vision problem. I think that we have an opportunity now, post all the pandemic stuff, to recast vision of what people are doing. And that I think after pandemic, we were just begging, please just come fill in the spot. Please
mm.
just come serve once every other month, just so we have a body in the room. And I
Right.
think it's time we've got to move past that. I think we've got to recast the vision of you are getting to disciple kids. This is the next generation of followers of Jesus. And we as the church have got to figure out holistically, not just the kids pastor, because y'all, they are drowning in just trying to get the spots filled. But as pastors, as other senior leaders within the church, we've got to cast the vision, not beg to fill spots, because that's gotten us where we are, but casting the vision of why it's important.
Yeah, this goes along with church safety as well. So when you
Yeah.
compromise your structure, you compromise your program, you open yourself up to church safety issues. When you lower the bar for your volunteers, you potentially create a liability with your children's ministry. So the answer can't be, well, we'll make it easier for people who would otherwise not be able to volunteer, because you've got to keep those standards stringent when it comes to child safety, which is why the pain point is the greatest in children's ministry.
Mm,
Because in a lot of other ministries, I hate to say that you can compromise. I don't mean to imply that, but the standards are different in
Yeah.
children's ministry. You have a much higher standard because of child safety. So it's just that much harder to get volunteers. What are you seeing in terms of approaches to ministry, child safety in ministry? What do you see works?
As far as, say that again. I'm sorry. Ask me that again.
So, yeah, I didn't ask it well. The churches that are doing child safety well, what do they look
Yeah.
like?
So, number one, background screen is always the first thing, right? Because that's just going to rule out the people who know that they shouldn't be there. They're not going to fill it out, or you're going to
mm,
catch that on the front end. Second is going along with this volunteer thing is we got to have two adults in a room at all times, two non-related adults preferably, because of all of the reasons, right? One person could be accused of something, the other person could say that it did or did not happen. Somebody gets hurt, you have one person who can get help and one person who doesn't. So that's got to be non-negotiable. And I always advocate for a third person floating around. No adult alone with a kid. These are just core things that are just in the fabric of the ministry. And the problem is when you're bringing in a volunteer who's serving once every 6 months, you're having to retrain that all the time, and
mm.
something's going to fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
So, moving on to a different topic here. Again, we're talking to Jenny Smith, the lead curriculum developer for Awana. And if you want to go see some of her work, you should go to brightcurriculum.com. That's BRITE, brightcurriculum.com. Link in the show notes, by the way. Let's go to a more sensitive subject here.
Sure.
One that will probably hit home with a lot of our families that are listening in. We have a lot of pastors and church leaders, but they have families. So I have a feeling that this is something that many of them are experiencing. Children today, kids, teenagers, they are facing more anxiety than they have than previous generations, and things like autism are on the rise. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a medical researcher. I'm not about to pretend like I can say why. I don't know why. But it's clear that things are different with this generation when it comes to special needs, anxiety issues, certain disorders. How are churches, the churches that are doing things well, these small and mid-sized churches, how are they dealing with things like the rise in anxiety?
I think first of all, they're recognizing and saying out loud that it is a thing, right? I think sometimes in church world, we just like to pretend that it's not, right? We just don't want to address, or the kids just aren't being raised properly at home, or we want to put it on 100 different things. But it doesn't matter. Our kids are different these days. This generation is different. And I know every generation says that, but this, in a course of just a few years, our kids have changed. Like you mentioned, the increase in anxiety disorders, 1 in 8 kids right now, they're saying 1 in 8 kids is dealing with an anxiety disorder. That's significant. When you think of how many kids are in your group that are dealing with that we may or may not know. Even educationally, whether it was pandemic shutdown or whatever it was, our kindergartners aren't reading, right? Everything, so many things are different. And as our volunteers are in the classroom, the churches who are handling all of this well are equipping them to handle different kids in different ways, meaning resourcing and training on trauma-informed care. Because a lot of our kids, whether they've been in the foster system, whether they've been adopted, whether they've had something at home, whether they just went through a shutdown of their schools for 2 years, our kids, a lot of our kids, are coming from a place of trauma. And you can't treat kids like that. You can't discipline kids like that. You can't manage kids like that, like we always have, right? When the three of us were growing up, it was expected, I'm just going to tell you to do this and you're going to do it. And that's just the end of the story. That doesn't work with kids in this generation. It doesn't work with kids from trauma. And we could argue all day long whether it should. It really doesn't matter. That's not the approach that's working. And so churches that are really understanding the trauma this generation's dealing with and the differences in this generation are helping equip their volunteers to deal with kids differently.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I've seen as a foster dad, and it's something that you get trained on. That you can't parent or guide or shepherd a child who's experienced trauma the same way as you do one who hasn't. And that may sound obvious, but when you're in the classroom with kids and some of them have experienced some trauma, others have not, that's very difficult, particularly for teachers that aren't trained in that area. And I know at West Bradenton, dealing with children who have anxiety issues or even children who have special needs it's been one of those things like, what do we do?
Right.
Because we have children that have autism and we can't turn them away. The church can't turn them away. You've got to figure out a way to deal with it. I'll just throw my 2 cents in here. I think children do experience more trauma than in the past, or at least maybe we notice it more. Maybe it's always been there. We just notice it more. That being said, I think one of the things that is decimating the health, the emotional, spiritual, mental health of our children is the exposure to pornography as well, and the early age at which children are exposed to pornography. Because you kind of go, well, what's different? Environmentally, what is different? And that's the question I've been asking myself. And there are a few things, but I think at the top of the list is the amount of pornography that young people pursue and the early age at which they are exposed to it. Now, is that the only thing that's causing trauma and all these issues? No, it's not the only thing. But goodness, I think that is a really key part of it. And if I could eradicate, if someone gave me the ability to eradicate one thing from this world, just say you can take one thing out of this world, I would say pornography. That would be the thing that I would remove from this world, because I think it's done so much harm. Josh, you're going to a new church. I just mentioned that earlier in the show. What are you expecting? What are you hoping for your children's ministry when you get there? I'm gonna just put you on the spot because I know you've got a bunch of your members listening, new members that you don't know well, and I really want to make things as awkward as possible for you.
Awkward's your favorite.
Yeah, I don't know what to expect yet. However, I have heard several times and through other pastors reaching out. I can't tell you how many times I've heard your new children's minister is one of the very best. I mean, from different pastors and ministers all across the state of Texas, I've heard, I mean, at least 2 dozen times. And I mean, Texas is huge, right? And yet this one children's minister, so I'm expecting a really great thing, phenomenal facilities. So some of these conversations about small or medium sized churches, Louisville's not going to fit into that category. However, one of the things that I keep thinking as we're discussing curriculum and volunteers and training is how much the leadership, particularly the pastors or the elders, they have to take into consideration this training factor and this equipping factor. That costs money and it costs time. And so while I would agree that you don't want to cheapen your program, right? Your Sunday morning program or your Wednesday night program or whatever it is, I do think that one of the biggest things that just has to come to a reality, and in children's ministry, it's very hard for people to come to this terms, is you may be doing too much. You just might have too many programs. I don't want you to water down any one of the programs, but pick one and go after it. I remember when I took Saxy at its time, in its heyday, was 800 to 1,000 people. When I took it, it was right at 100 people, right? And one of the conversations I had to have with the people was, a church of 100 doesn't do the same amount of programs that a church of 800 to 1,000. You just can't. So we have to stop. And a lot of smaller or medium-sized churches are still trying to either keep up with the other church down the street and offer all the same programs, or keep up with their past heyday and offer all the same programs. And that just may not be the case anymore. There's also programming that, if it's discipleship programming or music programming or sports programming, that was good at its time. It was, but it may not fit your church anymore. And so you may want to rethink and say, okay, we're going to focus in on a discipleship children's program Sunday morning. Then explore what's the best one for our church and our goals and our priorities. And then equip it and train it and develop it. I just think that we're just trying to, what I always call, prop up a dead horse, and it's killing you. And so in all of these things, the number of volunteers, it's not that some churches, it's not that they can't find enough volunteers on Sunday morning. It's that they can't find enough volunteers on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, coaching the team on Saturday, volunteering at the school. And so you got to really say, hey, we're going to fit a niche. We're going to stand here in this space, and it fits our holistic vision for the church. So that, I mean, in a roundabout answer, that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm also sort of expecting, just from taking a new church, that you're going to have to say, let's evaluate who we are and what we need to do. And I'm also expecting one of the very best children's ministers in the entire state of Texas. So those are my answers.
That's very kind of you to say, Josh, and very diplomatic. You did not make it awkward. I was hoping that you would. I love how you said. We've been doing this a long time. I love how you said, Texas is really, really big, and Texans like to remind everyone of how big Texas is.
Yeah, we're the biggest if you don't count the one that's all ice. We're pretty big.
Yeah, and I like to say, Texas is my third favorite state, and that's about right where it needs to be. I mean, it's definitely up there in the list. So yeah, right behind Florida and Arizona.
That's fine. I like
all right.
both of those.
All right, Jenny, as we're winding down here, let's talk about hiring, because this is something I hear a lot. Hey, do you know a student pastor? Do you know a children's minister? Hey, we're looking to hire XYZ. Do you know somebody? I know you get that request probably weekly. And we've been blessed. So you were the children's minister here at West Bradenton, and we were able to pass the baton to Brandy, who is doing a phenomenal job, but she was trained up from within. So talk to us about this shift in children's ministry when it comes to hiring.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the trend, because I'm like you. If 10 years ago people had asked me for names, I could have given you a list. Today, I can't. I mean, there's just not people out there to hire. And so that definitely is the trend for churches right now, is raising people up from within. And there's a lot of pros to that, right? Those people know the church, they know the culture, they know things that are really hard to coach. They know the people, they know the relationships, they have all of that established already. I would say there's some cons too, which you just have to be aware of and be ready to speak into. They're only going to know what your church does, right? There's a
Hmm.
potential if they've been raised up in your church, they don't have a lot of exposure to other options or other curriculum or other ways of ministry. So the way you can support that person in that is help find them coaching or help them find a group to be a part of, or help connect and network them with other kids ministers in other parts of the country. That's invaluable. Another challenge is if I believe strongly that there's that theological training is a big deal, and so when we
Hmm.
raise up from within, we need to make sure that we don't skip that part. Whether it's help them pursue a degree, or if they're not ready for that, look at other certification options or other training options where having some of those biblical foundations are good. A lot of times we'll hire from within for kids ministry and it's somebody's a teacher, which is awesome, and I highly recommend. That's where I came from too, from the teacher education space. But we got to make sure we're filling in those theological blanks as well, and just making sure that they have support, right? Just making sure that it's a big jump going from volunteer to maybe associate, or volunteer to now you've got the whole children's ministry. That's a really big jump. So just as we're doing that in our churches, making sure that we are giving them all the support and the resources, sending them to all the conferences, helping them learn as much as they can, and not just assuming they've been doing it so they got it.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we developed at Church Answers with Church Answers University. It's an inexpensive certification, but it's theological training. And so if you're looking to train somebody up from within, I think Church Answers University is a great way to go. You can learn more about it at churchanswers.university. So, Jenny, thank you for the ability to do my own promo there. I know you did not intend
Sure.
for that, but it's
I got
honestly,
you.
it's cheaper than moving somebody. So if you're looking to
Right.
train up somebody from within, it's going to be
Hmm.
cheaper for you to get them theological education through Church Answers University than it is to move somebody from another part of the country. So it's just a really good way to go. Again, churchanswers.university. And thank you, Jenny Smith, lead curriculum developer at Awana, develops the Bright curriculum. Thank you for joining us today.
Sure.
And
Thank you.
also want to thank our sponsor. We are blessed to have Upward as a sponsor. Upward Sports helps equip churches to run those self-sustaining sports ministries in their communities. I know that you're looking for a bridge into your community. Any church that's doing the mission of God is looking for that bridge. Well, guess what? You can use sports as a bridge into your community, and Upward Sports is the way to go. They do it better than anybody else. They've got all sorts of programs. Of course, if you have a gym, they can utilize that, but you don't even need a gym. If you just have a field or a parking lot, they can help you get something going. And oh, by the way, there's probably a gym in your community that you can use. These are the experts that can help you get this program going. We've had them on the show before, and Josh, do you remember what they said? It's something like, when you do Upward, 50% of the people that do Upward will be from your community.
Yeah,
So
and they said the average program is 160 kids. So
that's unbelievable.
80.
So
Yeah.
this is a great way to go. How do you learn more about it? Go to upward.org/churchanswers, upward.org/churchanswers, and they can help get you started.
Yep. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for listening, and we pray for you and your children's ministry in your various churches. We hope that you are having a great day and a great week, and we will catch you next week.
Upward Sports equips churches to run self-sustaining sports ministries in their communities. Whether you're a sports fanatic or on staff at a church, Upward Sports will give you all the tools you need to run a first-class sports ministry that allows you to reach families in your community. Upward Sports offers basketball, soccer, flag football, cheerleading, volleyball, baseball, and softball through league and camp offerings. At Upward Sports, we want to help your church make a difference and give you increased opportunities to share the gospel. Learn more today at upward.org/churchanswers.